So let us look at what we call meristems. What we can basically say at this point is that meristems can actually be termed as meristemic tissues. Okay, in plants, growth happens at particular regions. Okay, so these regions where growth happens, we have what we call meristemic cells, or what we are basically terming as meristems or meristemic tissues. So we want to look at where do we find these meristemic cells, and what properties do they actually have. Okay, so that's what you're going to look at in this presentation. Plants have what we call continuous growth, and this definitely means that they do not have periods where there is no growth. There is always growth throughout their life span. Okay, and that is why we are saying that the growth is continuous. For animals, growth happens during particular periods. Okay, so that is why we are saying that growth in animals is limited to specific periods. So growth in plants happens at specific parts, and these parts are basically the tips of the roots and the tips of the shoots. Okay, that's where we find cells that divide, okay, mitotically and contributing to growth therefore. So when we talk about meristems, we are basically talking about cells that are undifferentiated, cells that have not undergone specific or particular modifications such that they can perform particular functions. So it is these cells that actually divide, and then after dividing, they will later on get differentiated to form different types of plant cells. Okay, so meristemic cells have a unique ability, which is that they divide repeatedly through the process of mitosis and therefore contributing to growth. Okay, so we have just noted that meristems is where growth happens, and we are saying that it happens at the shoots, and then also it happens at the tips of the shoots, but also at the tips of the roots. Now these two parts form what we term as the apical meristems, but also we have other meristems, and these meristems also contribute to growth. Okay, but for them they are not found at the tips of the shoots and also at the tips of the roots. What we are saying here is that we have three types of meristems. The apical meristem that we started with, where we have the meristemic cells at the tips of the shoot and also at the tips of the roots. And then the second one is what we call the lateral meristems, which we can term as cambium. These ones are found around the stems and roots. They contribute to that thickening of the roots and also the stem. Okay, and that thickening is what we call secondary girth, or basically secondary growth. For apical meristem, it contributes to what we call primary growth, and which is basically the increase in height of the plant. Okay, so we have two types of lateral meristems. We have vascular meristems. This is where we get the secondary xylem and the secondary phloem. Okay, and then we have the core cambium, which gives us the back of the tree. Usually, we talk about secondary growth in these big trees or perennial plants. And then for monocots, they have what we call intercalary meristems, and these help in regenerating of these monocotyledonous plants when, for example, they are damaged or eaten by herbivores. So apical meristems, how do they look like? Now, they are actually similar. The apical meristem in the shoots and also the apical meristem in the tip of the roots are actually similar. But all these actually have three major regions, and these regions are the maturation zone, the elongation zone, and the meristemic zone. Okay, like we said earlier on, apical meristem contributes to primary growth, which is basically about increasing the height of the plant. So we are going to look at each of these zones and see what cells are there and what roles do they actually play. So the meristemic zone, you would expect that here we have mitotically dividing cells. These cells are actively dividing to give us more cells. So these meristemic cells, like we said earlier on, they are undifferentiated. Okay, that means that they divide to give us cells, and these cells will later on turn into cells that the plant will need. Okay, so the characteristics are that these cells are having large nuclei and they are rich in protoplasm. They have a thin cell wall, and this is important for rapid division. Okay, for the root, they have this extra part. The roots have this extra part, that is the root cap. It protects the delicate meristemic cells of the root. Okay, and you don't have that in the apical meristems in the tip of the shoot. So the second zone is the elongation zone. Remember, these cells are dividing and these cells are now pushed upwards to the elongation zone. Okay, so here the cells are large and they have large vacuoles, and the formation of new cell wall happens. That means that we are going to have now thicker cell walls. Okay, so the newly formed cells increase in length and lengthening, whether it is the roots or the shoots, and that's why we are terming it as the elongation is permanent enlargement of cells prior to differentiation. Okay, so the cells basically get elongated, and this process is irreversible, and then later on these cells will now differentiate to form different types of cells. Okay, so the differentiation happens in the maturation zone. Okay, this zone can also be called the zone of differentiation. So in this zone, what you're basically having is that the cells will reach maximum size, and now they will differentiate into different types of cells. Differentiation means that these cells get different structures and modifications to be able to perform certain functions. So they differentiate into other cells which have unique functions, such that they which have unique characteristics of features, such that they can perform specific functions. Okay, so an illustration here is that you in the xylem you have cells that we call the tracheids. These tracheids are formed when the cells actually lose the protoplasm. Okay, and after losing the protoplasm, they get strong elastic cell wall, and this basically makes them now what? Tracheids. Okay, so the modification that we're talking about here is the losing of the protoplasm, and then also development of the strong elastic cell walls for transport of what? Secondary xylem and the secondary phloem. The secondary xylem is inside, the secondary xylem is inside, and the secondary phloem is actually outside. Okay, the concambium is what contributes to the back. We already know that. So in summary, what we are basically saying is that in plants, growth happens at particular locations, and these locations contain what we call meristemic cells, These cells divide mitotically, contributing to primary and secondary growth. With primary growth is about the increase in height, and then with secondary growth is increase in the thickness. Okay, and the increase in thickness is contributed by the core cambium and the vascular cambium. Thank you.